Opening the show up, I'm really, really pleased to have in studio with me now a person that, I have to tell you, I didn't know your work until last week. And then everybody kept coming up to me saying, you got to talk to this guy. And I said, who? They said, the guy with the really big afro. And I said, okay, why? And then I started looking at your work. And I thought, I got to have him on the show. And his name is Jody Armour. He's the Roy P. Crocker Professor of Law at USC's Law School. And he's an author. And his newest book is called Nigger Theory. And this man is just like, he's like a walking electric wire, okay, in terms of what he sets off here. So I want to jump right into this. Jody Armour, welcome to the show.
Great to be with you, Michael.
Yeah, well, let's talk about this. As I said, you deal with a lot. You deal with the question of the reality that faces Black youth and Black people in general, the reality that faces them every day of their lives. It's like, an entire people is living a sort of parallel existence, although it's right in the middle of this society that everybody talks about. It's post-racial, it's this, it's that. Yeah. And you're talking about, you come up with something where your work focuses on, hey, the reality is very different. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, the cataclysm, Michael, over the last 30 years, we've seen with the crack plague and its festering aftermath, the mass incarceration of Black youth in some inner city neighborhoods. Now, I just put this in my book from my textbook, my criminal law textbook. 90% of the young Black men in some of these inner city neighborhoods will wind up in jail, on probation, or on parole at some point in their lives, 90%. And so the reason I started this work and called it Nigger Theory is that part of that mass incarceration problems stems from Black leadership failure, as well as white American and general America's indifference to the plight of these young Black males. And the inward part comes from a skit done by Chris Rock, famous, launched his career, in which he says, his punchline is, I love Black people, but I hate niggas. And one of his core definitions, key criterion of a nigger for him is a Black person who's done a crime. So what he's saying, according to his logic and that distinction, 90% of the young Black males in some of these inner city neighborhoods are going to wind up in jail, on probation, on parole at some point in their lives, are niggas. And I cannot abide by a moral universe that divides between us and them, good and bad, in that way, and is going to condemn 90% of guys who are like my sons to niggerdom. And so that is why I'm coming in using the language as part of the N-word, as part of an oppositional discourse, just like Mark Twain did, just like Harriet Beecher Stowe and Uncle Tom's Cabin, just like Richard Pryor, Dave Chappelle, Pac Nas Big, a lot of the gangsters, Ice Cube, have used the N-word as part of an oppositional discourse to take on the status quo, the prevailing vocabulary, that kind of the calcified vocabulary and language of the Academy, for example, that talks about mass incarcerations in very sterile, antiseptic terms, and you don't feel the pain of being in a 6x8 cell for 22 and a half hours a day in solitary, and then 90 minutes in a windowless pen. That pain that many of these young Black males are suffering because of the mass incarceration that followed on the crack plague and its festering aftermath, and that the Black community helped to create. Black leaders helped put them there. 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act, that was Charlie Rangel standing there right by Reagan when he signed it into law, that created the 100-to-1 crack to powder disparity and required mandatory minimums for the first time in federal law since '72. So we had a lot of benighted Black leadership, as well as general American indifference, and a way of thinking about Black criminals that says they're niggas and we are Black people. We're good Negroes, they are bad Negroes. That has led us now to this calamity that we got to get our minds around, hands around, and we're just starting to acknowledge in the last couple of years.
Tell me this, though, Jody, because one of the things that I kept thinking about, and I know I've heard some of your interviews and stuff on different TV stations and whatnot, and I've read some things, and I kept thinking about this. I think your point is really, really important. But I also think, here's something. Let me put it this way. Let's jump into this first, because this is the big hair sitting in the room. Okay,
right on.
Let's talk about this, because I want to know. You went further than that, and it has something to do with where is this coming from? What's behind it? You grew your hair out into a natural, a really magnificent fro. Okay, Why'd you do that? And what impact has it had on you? And what did you learn from this?
Oh, it's had a huge impact on me. I started all this work because my dad was incarcerated for 22 to 55 on some trumped up possession and sale of marijuana charges. And I started thinking seriously about the plight of poor black males who are disproportionately incarcerated. I started writing this book, Nigger Theory, and I missed a couple trips to Hear Architects, my local barbershop. I missed several months of trips. And then I went back to school, started teaching, overheard some of my students comment that it's ironic, that the language they use, that Professor Armour teaches criminal law while he looks like a criminal. And I said, whoa, wait, the only difference between me before when I looked like Obama and me now is nappy here. When I let the naps flow, suddenly I look like a criminal. And I even saw this same experience replicated at J.W. Marriott down at L.A. Live. I'm waiting for my friend Lino, my roommate from Lower Merion High School. You say you're from Philly, right outside Philly, on the main line. And we get back together again. He's ESPN Deportes general manager, and I'm waiting in the lobby, getting ready to go home, and 3 guards approach me, and this is just a couple months ago now. I am 50-something with gray hair. They approach me. They send the black one over to me. The black one says, sir, are you here to see someone? I said, yes, I was, but why aren't you asking anyone else in the lobby? It was around 11:30. He said, well, we've been having a problem with transients. I said, I look like a transient. Now, I had on exactly like I'm dressed now, except a tie. I had on slacks, hard shoes, a button-up shirt. I said, I look like a transient. He said, don't take it personally. Walked away. I tweeted real quick, called a former student at Latham downtown firm so someone else can hear this if they came back. He came back over and said, sir, what is the name of the guest you came here to see? Now, I teach torts in criminal law. I've taught him long enough to know this. What he was saying was, if I don't give them a name that they can find in the database, I've assumed the ejectable status of a trespasser, and they're going to lift me up bodily and throw me out of that lobby. That's what he was telling me just 2 months ago. Okay, a law professor who has a chair at USC. So because of the fro, when I looked like Obama, I didn't get this. So this fro is my hoodie. I say my afro is my hoodie. When the hoodie's up, my afro is my hoodie. I wear my heart on my head, not my sleeve, as I say, and I'm happy to be nappy, and I'm going to continue being nappy and repping for folks who want to celebrate the African-American soul through their nappiness and not be discriminated against and profiled in the process.
I like what you said, too, that when you said the more radical your politics got, the bigger your fro got.
That's right. No, Michael, it was just like as my thesis that I was writing in the book grew more radical, my hair grew more nappy. And they intertwined at some point, and like nappy ivy climbing a red brick wall, they intertwined, and here we are.
All right. Now, the reason I wanted to get into that is because that says something to me about what's behind all this. If you think about what's going on with mass incarceration, what happened with the war on drugs, that whole thing, I can't remember whether it was Ehrlichman or Haldeman talking to Nixon, and Nixon saying, look, here's the thing. We got to solve this problem. We got to make it look... We've got to solve this problem of the blacks. Yeah. Only we have to do it in a way that it doesn't look like that's what we're doing. Yeah. And so they invent this whole thing around the drug, and they did start pushing drugs out in the community, but they invented this whole thing that was the war on drugs that really became a war not just on poor people, but very, very much focused up on black people. And you think about that, there's a whole entire system that all the way through this has gotten to a point now where you can't look at this without saying, look, if you look at what's been going on, the demonization, the isolation, the fact that people, when they come out of jail, their lives are pretty much over in terms of mainstream society for the most part.
Yep.
The thing is there's a whole system that seems to be pushing this, and there's a whole, trend towards what I think is a slow genocide. What do you think of this?
Absolutely. And I think, Michael, I agree with much of what you said. I would just add a few extra nuances. One, it wasn't just the power structure that came up with the crack plague and its festering aftermath. Like I said, you had Charlie Rangel. Over half the Congressional Black Caucus voted for the 1986 Anti-Drug Abuse Act, okay, with the 100-to-1 powder, cocaine, and mandatory minimums, like I said. So, and that Chris Rock line, he said that to a black audience who was rolling in the aisles when he said, I hate niggas, I love black people, and black criminals are niggas, all right? So it's a deeper problem. It goes to how we think about morality, how we think about criminality, how we think about the good and the bad and the ugly, haves and have-nots, because it just so happens, See, what Chris Rock didn't say, and these other people who are demonizing criminals don't say, it just so happens that the vast majority of the people he's calling niggas are also from below the poverty line. It's not the middle class crime rate for blacks and the middle class crime rate for whites is almost identical. So the prisons are bulging from those truly disadvantaged blacks. And so what he's saying is, I love Bill Cosby blacks, but I hate truly disadvantaged blacks. That's a way to translate what he's saying. And that's the ugly class bigotry behind all of this politics of distinction.
Mm-hmm. You know, and one thing I'd have to say too, though, is like, you know, look, even with this Charlie Rangel and the Black Congressional Caucus and all this stuff, I mean, no matter who's in there, I mean, Dellums, all these people were, you know, they were all part of this at that time. And the thing that you have to recognize is that throughout history, there have always been people who supposedly have some connection to the oppressed, who've always stood up with and walked with the oppressor, who've always served. I mean, look, there was the Judenrat in Nazi Germany, you know, and in Poland. There was the people who sort of, don't worry about this, you know, or damn it, it's personal responsibility and choices. You've got to just take responsibility for your life. And who eased the way into the camps. When we're talking about Germany, there were black slave owners, you know, in the South. You know, there was all these people who always had some aspect of relationship with the system, and in terms of enforcing that oppression, you know, helping to make it go down. And that's why I keep thinking this thing about, look, the systemic question here, because even, I don't know, I just think it's really important, because when you're talking about Bill Cosby, I mean, look, that's his whole thing, is from the way people name their kids to wearing their pants, as if naming your kid Harry or something is going to make a difference, or wearing your pants tied up around your chest is going to make a difference in whether or not you can get a job, whether or not you stay out of jail. You know, this is a terrible situation that we're in, and people don't recognize that.
Yeah, and you put your finger right on the basic split. The basic split is between those people who explain poverty and crime and lots of other social issues in terms of personal deficiencies and personal responsibilities, and those who explain those same phenomena in terms of macro level social factors, okay? That's the big split. And typically, those on the right are trying to explain things in terms of personal responsibility, and those who are more progressive are trying to say society needs to step up and take accountability for these social ills, for these social pathologies that these are merely symptoms of. So yeah, that is the big battle that we're doing. But we got to recognize that many of the soldiers that we need fighting for a kind of more progressive agenda have bought into the personal responsibility line. President Obama, for example, he stands up in front of Morehouse men at graduation and starts lecturing them about personal responsibility. Okay, these guys who've just gone through 4 years of a grueling education and demonstrated abundant personal responsibility, he doesn't talk to students at Ohio State about personal responsibility. He doesn't talk to them in the other schools, but every time he's talking to black folks, it's about personal responsibility.
Well, look at what he did when he did that speech around the March on Washington. You know, and the whole point where he blamed black people for the situation that they're in today. You know, you're not doing the right thing. You're not taking personal responsibility. You're doing this, or you turned those programs we had to give you aid. You turned it into a way to get a free welfare check, or to get some freeload off of the system. And you're talking to a whole people that has been systematically oppressed. Look, the foundation of this country was slavery, and it continues to this day. If you want to take a through line, you take Dred Scott, Emmett Till, and Trayvon Martin, and we can go on after that. But there's a through line there about what this country is, and it wouldn't be what it is today without that foundation of slavery.
Exactly, and we have to take on those personal responsibility folks frontally, you know, like Obama.
Here's a question, because how do you see doing that? You know, because look, there is a point that people raised, and I know they raised this to you about, well, look, Jody, you know, there are bad things going on in the ghetto. There are bad things going on between people, and you have those people who are just like buying into the thing, and who are, you know, I'm not talking about the politicians and whatnot, but I'm talking about other people who look and say, well, you know, there's some stuff going on, whether they're white people, black people, whatever. There's some stuff going on there, and there are some crimes being committed here, and then there's the reality of there are crimes. People treat each other badly in those kinds of situations a lot of times. How do you see changing the perception of all this, the thinking of all this, broadly in society, as well as among the people who are falling into this game?
Yeah, it should sadden but not surprise us. You take a group of people, you disproportionately concentrate them in desperate circumstances, they're going to disproportionately turn to desperate undertakings like crime. So yes, there's crime going on among very poor people in these very truly disadvantaged areas. But the way you take on somebody like Obama, all these personal responsibility folks, is first you say, you know, walk the walk as well as talk the talk. Obama, you're talking about personal responsibility and how it's internal deficiencies that are holding black people back, a lack of a dad in the house, for example. You're always talking about how important it is to have a two-parent house. You only came from your single mom household. Well, hold on, time out. You only had one parent in the household and you wound up president? So apparently having only one parent in the household can't hold you back from being president, number one. Number two, the reason one parent in the household didn't hold you back is because you went to the best private high school in Honolulu, from which you went to Columbia and then on to Harvard, and you had grandparents that were able to put you in the best private high school in Honolulu. So you had economic support. So it had nothing to do with your internal deficiencies. It was what was your external support structures that helped you do what you did.
And it also has to do with, look, here's a point. I mean, yeah, you got all these external support structures, everything else, but there's a fundamental thing here of, it is true. I mean, like if you look at look, Obama, if Obama wasn't recognizable, and we saw it with Henry Louis Gates, you walk into your house, you could be beat up, pushed around, and arrested. One of the foremost black intellectuals in the country, and the cat ends up in jail trying to explain why he's in his own house. You can see these kinds of things that happen all the time because there is this point of, and I'm more concerned. I'm not concerned about changing Obama's mind around this because as far as I'm concerned, look, you can't be the commander in chief of this horrendous person-eating, immoral, terrible, fascistic regime and somehow really be secretly, I'm on the side of the people. No, sorry, it doesn't work. And I'm not going to try and convince you to be on the side of the people. But there are a lot of other people that we have to talk about. How are you going to break them out of this stuff? How are you going to break them? Because it's a situation where really we are faced with a state of emergency and there is not the commensurate response to that. We have a state of emergency around what really is a slow genocide that could turn into a fast genocide.
Yes. We don't have a lot of concern for him, Michael, because we don't think for 30 years. I've been out here. I wrote that for my first book, Negrophobia, in '97. I was screaming about this issue. Nobody wanted to hear about it. People have jumped on the bandwagon the last year or two since Michelle Alexander wrote her book, The New Jim Crow, describing mass incarceration as a new form of Jim Crow. But here's why people haven't been upset about this for 30 years, because they don't see the victims of mass incarceration as anything like the victims of Jim Crow. The victims of Jim Crow they saw as innocent blacks. You saw Medgar and Rosa and Martin. You don't see Stanley Tukey Williams and gangbangers and drug dealers as innocent victims of social oppression like Jim Crow. So you need to go after the moral argument. You need to go after the moral distinction. You need to go after what Chris Rock is trying to do when he drives a wedge between law-abiding people and criminals by saying, I love black people and I hate niggas. That's the new frontier, Michael, for 2014 and going forward.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing, and damn, this time went fast. We are going to have you back, man, because we got to continue this conversation. Because the other thing is actually what we're getting up to is also, look, there has to be. Look, I'm a revolutionary. I'm a communist. I believe that only revolution is going to resolve this situation. When you have a whole system that's based on the oppression of black people from the days of slavery on, and when you're talking about all these people who are, who, yes, they are not given an inch in terms of, their lives and what it's all about. But there's this thing of people have to be, we have to find a way to actually break through on all this and to change the thinking broadly, to fight against things like mass incarceration. But even more, I think a lot more people, for me personally, I think a lot more people got to understand, where is this coming from? Is it really systematic and systemic? And that's a big thing. That's a big thing. Maybe what we can do, if you can comment on that if you want, and maybe we can come back very soon and talk about that again.
Well, let's pick it up again. I'll just throw this out real quick. Durkheim, in his great book, Suicide, said, I'm going to take one of the most personal acts someone can imagine, the decision to take your own life, to be or not to be, that seems like you're only wrestling with your own personal demons. And I'm going to show you how that's a social fact, how self-destruction is really about social conditions and social facts and macro-level social phenomena. So, yeah, it's got to go that deep.
All right, Jody Armour, I am definitely going to have you back. It may be after the fund drive that's coming up, but I'm going to have you back, and we'll continue this conversation because we do really got to get much deeper into it.
I look forward to it.
Sure. Thank you, man. Thank you very much for being here. All right, you've been listening to The Michael Slate Show, and our guest today has been Dr. Jody Armour. He's the Roy P. Crocker Professor of Law at USC, author of Negrophobia and Reasonable Racism, Nigger Lover, Luck, Law, and Language in the Social Construction of Niggers, and he is also, his latest work is Nigger Theory. And pay attention to this because this is one of the most essential questions and important questions we're all facing today.